Welcome to the FAFSA Leadership Lounge, where we dive into the policies shaping the work of Florida's school leaders. I'm Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janasiewicz, lobbyist for FAFSA and for several school districts across Florida.
So on the calendar, it's officially the last week of the legislative session. However, it really doesn't look like session's going to end anytime soon. Last week, Speaker Danny Perez said it is looking tough for Florida lawmakers to complete a budget by the scheduled end of session. He went on to say that the House and Senate have still been having conversation in hopes of eventually getting closer, but there's still not a fundamental agreement on what the budget should look like.
I think we're all feeling a little deja vu here. This is feeling frighteningly like last session. So remember, the only thing that the state constitution requires lawmakers to do each year is pass a budget. They don't have to pass one piece of legislation, but we do have to have a budget. If the budget isn't law by July 1st, the state government enters into a partial shutdown, which has never happened in the history of Florida. Last year, they came pretty close. You'll recall it was not until June that we ended up with the budget. So the regular session last year was extended by a month and a half to agree on the budget and the tax package. Of course, last year's session started in March and ended in May, which is how we got to being at that terrible time, so close to the end.
And it would be absolutely awful if we extended from the beginning of March all the way until June. Right. So, as you would expect, creating a budget for a large state like Florida is a long and complex process. So we'll give them a little bit there, especially when you look at just how big Florida's economy is. So as of last fiscal year, the 24-25 year, Florida's GDP estimated at $1.7 trillion to $1.85 trillion, which makes us the fourth largest state economy in the U.S. And to give a little bit more perspective, if Florida was an independent nation, we would have the 15th largest economy in the world, which is a little smaller than Mexico and Australia, and a little bigger than Indonesia and the Netherlands.
Wild. I mean, those are crazy stats. Who knew we were that important?
Yeah.
So the budget process, it actually begins each year in July. So we're almost right when our fiscal year ends at the end of June, we start the process again for the budget. The governor and legislative leadership provide written instructions to state agencies to develop what they call their budget requests. We sometimes call them LBRs, legislative budget requests. These guidelines may request some or all of the state agencies to submit budget requests that reflect a budget reduction percentage. So they sometimes say, take what you had this year, reduce it by 5%, produce that, and then give that to the legislature and the governor.
And we know this year, we knew it was going to be a difficult financial year for the budget. So they did basically go to all of the agencies and say, listen, you need to make some cuts.
That's right.
So after that happens in July, then in August and September, a long-range financial outlook report must be developed that compares projections of state revenue with the cost of major programs such as Medicaid and in the annual budget. So state law dictates that the report provide a 3-year picture of Florida's fiscal strategy. And much of the work to develop the report, particularly the revenue estimates, is carried out by the Office of Economic and Demographic Research.
That's right, because we, of course, are dependent on sales tax for the vast majority of the revenue that our government uses to build the budget. So we have to build that on projections because we don't exactly know how much money is going to come in, but that's what we have these smart economists for, to kind of make those predictions for us. Once they produce the outlook, then state agencies and the judicial branch create their own long-range program plan. This plan outlines the next 5 years of priority programs, project needs, agency implementation goals, etc. They're due annually by the end of September.
And then the next month in October, all the way through January, really, state agencies and the judicial branch use their plans and the financial outlook to shape the annual legislative budget requests and provide a breakdown of the amount of money that each agency needs to perform the functions authorized and required by law. So LBRs are due from each agency by October 15th of each year, and those agencies then explain their budget requests in public hearings and give presentations to the various legislative appropriation committees during those interim legislative committee weeks. And that, of course, is held open prior to the opening of legislative session. And we usually see that within education, state board meeting, usually in September or October. They will do a full update on what the budget is looking like for the Department of Education and what that proposal is going to be. And then the board takes a vote to approve what the department has put together.
That's right. And for our folks, if you've been here in Tallahassee for legislative days when we're having committee weeks and not when it's session, the January is when it's committee weeks, you may have heard, depending on how early it is, some of those budget requests being presented in committee, because after they are approved by their agency, and as Michelle said, the state board for us in education is the one that makes that approval. Then they go and present to the House and Senate committees to give them an idea of what they're asking for. And then the governor himself will use the LERs to then build and craft his budget recommendation. So, and it is just that, it's a recommendation, but they look at it a great deal. And certainly in our government here in Florida, with the Republicans having the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, we have seen for the last many years, they take a lot of the governor's recommendations, and maybe not all, but they certainly look at his what he's produced and try to help his priorities. So state law requires that the governor submit a recommendation at least 30 days before the legislative session. So it usually comes in February when it's a year like this year. And it kind of is our first idea of like, what does the governor prioritize this year? It is also, we always, of course, would love to see an increase in education. And when he provides one, that's usually a good sign, because we're like, okay, this is what he's asking for and is going to champion.
Absolutely. So then, of course, our legislature, the House and the Senate, begin to craft what will become the state's budget during the session. To turn the governor's recommendations and those LBRs into resources, like you were saying, to really help them build that out. And then using those revised figures provided by a March conference of state economists and information gathered during the appropriation committee meetings, legislative leadership decides how much each subject area or each agency has to spend. And then so in a year like this is happening a little bit earlier since session started in January, but we're now getting closer to where we are today. So the various appropriation committees are going to create their chamber's version of that budget. Those appropriation bills get filed. They're open to amendments by all members as they move through, and then, of course, passed by each chamber.
That's right. Exactly. You're right. Because I misspoke. We are in a early session this year, but the March to May session is when they would have things out by February. But that's kind of where we are right this moment, where up to where Michelle just described. We have both chambers' budgets that we have seen. They have been passed by both chambers. And then normally we would be doing this next step. So what would normally happen at this juncture is near the end of the session, usually in the last couple of weeks of the session, the House and the Senate announce who we call them conferees, are going to be. Those are the individuals that are going to sit on the various conference committees to determine what the budget's going to look like. Because, of course, we have a House budget and a Senate budget. They're going to have to come together. And each committee, so unlike what you see during typical committees where the House has one committee, the Senate has its own committee, these committees are joint committees. So they have both House and Senate members on those committees. And they will then negotiate what they are going to build the budget. So they'll be given the allocation for their area in pre-K 12, or really pre-K 20 education. We are usually about a third of the budget generally. So once they figure out whatever that big number is going to be, we generally get about a third of that. And then they will go back and forth and try to determine how we get to a final agreement. After a certain period of time, though, those committees will stop meeting and issues will get bumped to what we call the big chairs. Those are our House and Senate appropriations chairmen, and then they will have a committee of folks. They'll go back and forth and do the same exercise and until we get to an agreement. If there are any outstanding differences after that period, then the speaker and the president are essentially the ones who ultimately make that decision. And then once they are done, we get what is called a conference report and we get the whole budget that is then produced.
And so just to give listeners like kind of where we are right now in comparison to those steps, right? The House and the Senate are nearly $2 billion apart on the big number. So they have to agree on what the total state budget is going to be for the year first. And then they agree on, okay, education, you're going to get this much. And health and human services, you're going to get this much. And all the way down the line. And then that's where those committees come in and refine the details of it and move that forward. But we're still $2 billion apart at the big top number.
Yes.
And that's where some of this is delaying.
That's right.
So we have so let's just pretend all things are great and they come together and we're moving forward. There is a 72-hour cooling off period for the conference committee report. It's released to allow for public review before the adoption of the report by both chambers. This is also another reason why we're looking at either extending the session or having a special session to finalize the budget, is because it has to start tomorrow in order for the legislature to end on time. And that would be this Friday. So each chamber is still working through that. And then each chamber votes on the final version of the budget. And then the conference report cannot be amended and must be approved in its entirety. If a chamber fails to adopt the conference report, the conference process must start all over again.
So you can see they really want to avoid that. And they want to make sure what they produce is the agreed upon budget. And then we have our final step. The budget is then delivered to the governor, who gets to review and approve it. What's an interesting thing here is there is some strategy involved here, because whether or not the budget is sent to him while it is still session, that would obviously mean that we're way ahead of schedule. Or if it is
I don't know if I've ever seen that.
No. Or if it's sent after they sine die, there's a difference in the amount of time that he has before he signs the budget. If the governor were to do nothing by a certain period of time, it would just become law. Now, of course, no governor is ever going to do that because they want to be able to have their say. So the governor and his staff, really even at the conference process, are already looking at some of the proposals so that they can have an idea of, we like this, we don't like this, what they are going to determine what he can veto, because he can veto certain items, and he does, in fact, do that. So the legislature could still have a say. So let's say in a world that the governor vetoed the budget. It has happened before. We had it probably 10 years ago, maybe, with when it was Governor Scott. Governor Scott vetoed the budget, and his reason for doing so was he did not agree with the money they put into education, and he wanted it to be more. So he vetoed the budget. They came back, and they did the process over again. We are in a situation this year, interestingly, that we were not 10 years ago, that if the governor vetoes the budget or certain items in the budget, the legislature can overturn his vetoes with a 2/3 vote. The Republicans back in the day, during Rick Scott's time, did not have that supermajority. That does exist today. So theoretically, if the governor were to veto the whole budget or veto parts of the budget, the legislature could still come back and override those vetoes if they wanted to do so.
Yeah. And so one more thing that's also pretty important, and it happens after the chambers approve their budget and before it's reviewed by the governor is Sine die, which we've talked about before. In Latin, it means without day. And this is the official end of session.
Yeah.
And for those that have been in the process and working so hard on all of this, that is the day that we're looking forward to probably the most. And you've probably seen it where the Speaker of the House and, of course, our Senate President drop white handkerchiefs, or really the sergeants come out and they drop these big, huge handkerchiefs on TV. And that is to signal sine die and just, hey, it's over. We came to an agreement. And it would be so nice to see that this year.
It'd be wonderful.
I just don't know that we're going to get that.
I don't think so. So that also is usually, again, we're not feeling it this year, usually a time where the leadership and the governor are all there. They're kind of showing this like, look, we've come together, we've made an agreement, let's celebrate our successes for this legislative session. But that kind of implies that people are getting along and wanting to be around one another, which is probably not how we're going to feel at the end of this. Now that we are all experts in Florida's budgeting process, let's take a look at some bills that are looking like they're going to see the finish line. We have actually had some movement with bills. The first is CS for House Bill 851. That is a bill that is entitled Professional Learning for Instructional and School Administrative Personnel, has passed both the House and the Senate. So that one will be on its way to the governor.
So under that bill, every school district would have to offer at least one autism-specific professional learning opportunity each year for teachers and administrators. The training must use evidence-based practices covering academics, behavior, communication, and inclusion, and be developed with the local Center for Autism and Related Disabilities.
Yes. And another one that is well on its way to get through both chambers is CS for House Bill 1073, which is entitled School Districts. But we actually think of that more of a school board bill because that's more what it deals with. It went through the House very easily. And the Senate version, to tell you the iterations it's been through, is CS for Senate Bill 1620. So that tells you how many changes we've had in this bill on the Senate side. But it did make it through its committee process in the Senate, and it is on the special order calendar for today.
And that bill will boost school district transparency and empower school board members. It guarantees board members quick access to district documents, requires meeting attachments like contracts and budget files to be kept as public records, and mandates that full line item budgets be posted online. The bill also bans districts from pressuring employees to sign non-disclosure agreements. If approved, it would take effect on July 1.
That's right. A few more, CS for House Bill 461, which is entitled Volunteering at Polling Locations, is off to the governor's desk for his approval. This is a bill that would let students earn volunteer hours for working at election polling locations. Sounds quite simple and should be an easy thing to implement, but it just hasn't come up in the past. We just haven't seen this legislation before.
Yeah. The another bill, the Speech and Debate Education Bill, is looking good to pass. So CS for CS House Bill 1059 and CS for CS Senate Bill 1062 are in their final stages. The Senate version has passed through the chamber, and the House version is on the second reading as of last Thursday. The bill creates a statewide Speech and Debate Hall of Fame. It establishes Florida's Speech and Debate Week every February and formalizes the Florida Debate Initiative to support programs from kindergarten through college. It funds coaching, competitions, regional debate teams, and new training pathways for teachers, backed by a $2.4 million annual appropriation starting this year.
That's right. And it's interesting, it's a positive, great bill to support that. And we know that our Supreme Court justice that's from Florida, who went to school in Miami-Dade, was on the debate team in Miami-Dade, and credits that for, kind of sparking her interest in the law and debate and all that. So this could be a great a great thing to highlight in the state.
And you
So
just never know what's going to spark a student
that's right.
from what their future is going to be.
Yes. So hopefully, when we talk to you all next week, we'll have better answers of what is going to happen in our future, and whether or not we are going to be in an extended session or if they're going to come back or how they're going to work out these problems with the budget. But hopefully, we'll know more next week.
That's right. And we look forward to chatting with you then. Thank you so much for listening to the FAFSA Leadership Lounge. We continue to grow our reach every week. So please make sure that you are sharing the news about it, sharing the episodes, and what you're finding particularly valuable for your work as a school leader. Thank you so much, and stay tuned to next time.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michelle White and Jessica Janasiewicz. The podcast was produced by Jeff Willoughby. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topics, suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.